ground. It's like, gee, is this going to feel like a hit of some kind? And in fact, he never did. I mean, I can't say he never wrote another song, but as a songwriter, he just faded away. He ended up making a very good living as a background singer on people's records. He was very good at that. He's a guy that could sing the lowest of low parts and in falsetto sing the highest of high parts, so he was in demand all the time. But you know, there was so much pressure that he at that point would be putting on himself that there was really no way to continue. And it was, I mean, when Bowen told me that, it was sort of heartbreaking, really, that he would say that. And so for me, it really is a lot of free association. You know, I don't really have an idea. I mean, I have friends that have books, you know, legal pads full of things that they've jotted down and that they can resurrect at any particular time. And I mean, in Nashville, there's a lot of co-writing. Nowadays, it's not unusual to have 3 or 4 people on the song. When I moved to Nashville, which was like 36 years ago, I don't know that I'd ever done any co-writing, and so the concept of it was really kind of strange to me, and it took me a while to get into it. But I needed to produce more songs. I needed to come up with more songs because I was writing for a publisher, and they kind of have expectations since they don't actually pay you money, but they will advance you money on future earnings, and hopefully you'll have them. And if you don't, then they lose. You know, it's sort of their gamble, this advance. That's the only thing about it. But I did start to work more with other people, and when I moved to Nashville, I was very I was not interested in someone else's opinion, and quite honestly, I'm still not. I really am. I'm a bit of a jerk when it comes to that, actually. But I was like 30 or 31 years old when I moved to Nashville, and most people when they get there are younger than that. And so I was sort of slightly more fully formed as a songwriter. And my background, I had been working in Los Angeles for like 10 years before that. And I was writing country songs. I was playing in country bands, and I loved bluegrass music as a kid, and so that had a huge influence on me. And then, you know, mixed in with all kinds of other influences. But so I knew how to write a song, but what I didn't know how to do was how to finish a song, really. And so I had a lot of half-baked tunes when I got there. And but I came into an environment when I got signed to a publishing company called Tree International. Now, Tree International, which is now Sony, at that time, I don't know if you are familiar with country writers, so if I throw any names out at all, but I mean, I walked into a building where every day people were in rooms, and I'm talking about people like Curly Putman, who wrote Green Green Grass at Home, Bobby Braddock, who wrote Divorce, He Stopped Loving Her Today, you know, this caliber of songwriting. And when those guys would make a suggestion, I was smart enough to listen. And what I realized that what I was doing was I was pretty good at putting choruses together and the first verse. But my second verse is always sort of veered off into the ether somewhere. And I started learning how to finish them, you know, how to continue the story into the next verse. And I remember Harlan Howard saying that the second verse has to catch you more than the first verse. where that story is going. I mean, you can kind of suck somebody into the melody and the general ethos of what that sound is. And then if you have a good catchy chorus, well then hopefully people are singing along. But when you get to the second verse, it's like, okay, now what? What happens now? And so you really sort of have to, dig out how to finish up that song. And I started learning the craft more. I hesitate to say art, really. It's not the word I use. It's certainly not towards myself. But it was really, that's really what it came down to, is learning the craft of, okay, what is this? And in talking to and I was fortunate enough to co-write with these people, and they were so kind and so generous to me, which was not what it was like in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, anybody that had any kind of success at all kind of built a little wall around it and tried to protect it, and with that sort of thing. Where when I came into Tree, they wanted to hear songs. I mean, another writer that they wanted to hear good songs. It was inspiring to them to go on and do that. It's like if you're a musician, you want to hear good musicians because it inspires you to play. And like with musicians, I read something. There's a woman, Carol Kay, who's a bass player with the Wrecking Crew in Los Angeles, and I read something that she had said that as a player, she said you're better off sitting home and playing along with records than you are to go out and play with people that are not at least as good as you, and hopefully better, because you will rise to their level. It's like, if you're going to play basketball, you're not going to become a better basketball player by playing with people that don't play basketball as well as you. But if you get out on the court with people that really know what they're doing, you're going to start learning pretty quickly what to do and what not to do. And so these people were very kind and very generous. And, I was fortunate. I mean, I started having songs recorded almost immediately. I mean, the first demo that I did there, which was like 5 songs, I mean, 3 of those songs were recorded within the next couple of months. This is not, I don't say this in a, oh boy, look at me kind of way at all, because it was quite shocking to me. And quite honestly, none of them are songs that I would ever sing again. And I got to the point where I was writing this craft concept that I was into that. I started showing up like these guys. I mean, learning from these guys. I mean, these guys would show up at 10 o'clock in the morning, every morning, and they would, go in. Curly and Sonny Throckmorton and Braddock would go into one of their offices, and they would work until noon, and then they would go to lunch, and then they would come back and they would finish that song, or start another one. And it was not unusual for these guys to write a song, 2 songs in a day. And you have to. That's another not censoring thing. Is that you have to keep doing it. You can't be sitting around waiting for some inspiration of some kind. That's not going to happen. It could happen, but it's not bloody likely. But if you show up and you every morning at 10 o'clock and do whatever routine it is that you have to do to get going, whatever form that may take, and you do it every day, you will write a lot of really bad songs. But they will be complete. They will be whole songs. They will have a beginning, a middle, an end, and a chorus that you can sing along to. And then hopefully somewhere in there, in that batch of songs, there'll be something that's actually good. And I started working with other people and got into this mindset of writing songs that I didn't really like. I didn't really care about them at all. My mission was to actually complete songs. And so I would write a song and finish it and go, well, I don't really care for it. Maybe the Oak Ridge Boys will cut it. And sometimes they did, because what someone else was looking for and what I was looking for, 2 entirely different things. And so I did okay for a number of years until I got tired of doing that. I mean, I was just really tired of writing songs that I didn't like, and that I knew I could do that. And so I went on to another program for myself. And when I got to Nashville, I had spent the previous 10 years, actually longer than that, but because it would go back to when I was like 19 or 20, living in Boston and having bands. And I always thought, as a kid when you listen to the radio, I always thought that the people that were singing the songs were actually there, in that studio or wherever was coming out of that box, that someone was actually doing that. And it wasn't until much later that I found out that wasn't true. And I lost my train of thought, but that's all right. That'll happen a lot.
So, Kieran, do you now only write towards yourself?
Absolutely, and have for 30 years. I never write anything with anybody else. Well, I didn't write with anybody else in mind at that time, just sort of generally. Because there were so many people in those days, there were a lot more outlets for songs in Nashville. And Tree, where I was the #1 country music publisher in the world. I mean, the names that were there were phenomenal. And, there was a full-on 24-track studio in the building. I mean, by God, state-of-the-art studio that had just been finished when I got there in '79. And it was going 18 hours a day, and the sessions, they call them two 10s and 6s. So it'll be a 10 o'clock session till 1 o'clock, you get an hour off, and a 2 o'clock to 5, et cetera, et cetera. And then the 6 o'clock could go on forever. And all of those also could run into each other, but with a demo, you had to get the work done in 3 hours, and they wanted 4 or 5 songs in that amount of time. And so you had a lot of demo musicians that who later became, sort of A-team players that were playing on the hits. But that was like a journeyman anyway, that you could get into playing on these demos, that people would hear your work, and you would go on from that. But yeah, it was really crazy, and it was just an absolute hotbed of activity. And for me, a lot of the other younger writers that came there were, as I said, not quite as fully formed as I was, because I was older, had been doing it longer, and well, that's pretty much it. And so for me, coming into the building, it was different, and some of the song pluggers, or one in particular, took to my work and sort of would pitch my songs on a regular basis. And I ended up getting a record deal almost immediately, and I had spent 10 or 12 years actively trying to get a record deal. When I was in Los Angeles, I had a band that was, and all the bands that I ever worked with, starting back to when I was like 17 or 18 years old, were always based on me as a writer, and then whatever else it was I wanted to do, which would usually be like Merle Haggard songs, or Stanley Brothers or something like that, but in what was known as country rock back in the 70s, in that sort of form. And when I finally moved to Los Angeles, I was working in a honky tonk in the San Fernando Valley in North Hollywood, and it was a joint with all. To tell you what kind of place this was, when you went in, and excuse me for the ladies here, but there was a velvet painting over the jukebox of a naked woman with her legs wrapped around a pool cue. This is the kind of place that I was working in, and somehow some people from Nashville, some writers from Nashville and a couple of musicians, would come into that club when they were in town and sometimes sit in with the band. And I was the lead guitar player in the band, and I only sang because I had to. I didn't really want to. I didn't really want to be there. I didn't really want to be in this band. But I had I was living with a woman for a long time out there, and she left. And I realized that she had been paying all the bills. And suddenly I was like, oh my God, the rent is due, and I don't have any money. And so I had a really great old Gibson F4 mandolin that I had bought when I was about 12 years old, 13 years old. And it had appreciated greatly in value even in that short amount of time. And the guy had offered me money for it at one point. He said, if you ever want to sell this, I'll buy it for this amount of money. And I called him and said, come and get it. And someone told me about this band that was looking for a guitar player. I had never played in a situation like this ever in my life, but I knew country music, and I figured I could do that, and so I did. But anyway, so these people, for whatever reason, started coming in, and we became friends, and they heard some of the songs that I had written and some demos that I did, and one of them was a guy and a woman, and the guy's name was Rafe Van Hoy, who is unbelievably great songwriter, and had started having hits when he was like 17 years old, and he's quite a few years older than I was. And they said, we want to try and get you a publishing deal. I had no idea what a publishing deal was. Going back to the music coming out of the radio, I thought, I'll write the songs, have a band, make a record, boom, rocket to start it. And so I would, while I was in Los Angeles, I would always be able to dig up somebody who was willing to put up some money to go into a studio, to do a demo, to pitch it to a label, et cetera, et cetera. And so I did record auditions over and over and over again. And basically, the turnover in the A&R department at like Columbia, Capitol, A&M, all the studios out there was a high attrition rate. And so every time I heard that the head of A&R was gone, I would go back because this guy didn't know who I was, so I could try it again. But it never worked. I mean, I would always get this. I remember I went into this guy, Jack Gold's office. He was the head of Capitol Records, and I had gotten an audition with him, and I knew a guy named Eddie Tickner who managed Emmylou Harris, Graham Parsons, Byrds. Somehow I met him, and he said, well, if I can help you anytime, I will. And so I would go, whenever I had one of these auditions, I wanted to have somebody there that looked like I had something going on, when I in fact didn't. And so Eddie would say, I'd say, well, look, I got an audition at Capitol on Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he'd say, okay, meet me at Dupar's at 9, we'll have coffee and pie, and then we'd go up there, and he would sit down, never say a word. I would do my little dog and pony show, and then they'd go, thank you, but no thanks. And the comment that I always remember was this guy, Jack Gold, and I went with my brother, and we had, put on our performing togs, and so we looked sharp. And I remember him saying, I like it, but I want to love it. And that was it. So when I got these people, they got me a publishing deal. I was still living in Los Angeles. My girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, was pregnant. And I was working in a honky-tonk 6 nights a week, making $150. And on Friday and Saturday night, I would work from 9 until 2, and then have an hour off, and then the after hours started on Friday and Saturday, and I would work from 3 until 7 in the morning. And Sunday afternoon jam session from 4 to 6. And as I got the princely sum of $150 a week for this, for me, it was a fortune. Because I had, I was living in a guest house that, cost me $125 a month. I couldn't go out at night because I was working all the time. For years, people were telling me about this thing called Saturday Night Live, and I was like, what the hell is Saturday Night Live? I mean, I was in a bar somewhere, playing. I didn't know what it was. And they'd be telling all these stories on Sunday about this show. I didn't know what anybody was talking about. Anyway, so they got me a publishing deal in Nashville at MCA Publishing, and they were going to pay me $50 a week, give me a draw, $50 a week. I didn't have to move to Nashville. I could stay in LA, and they sent me the contracts, and I sent them a bunch of songs, and then I talked to them, and they went, well, we've been playing some of these songs around, and we think this song here needs a second verse, a different one, or this one needs a bridge or whatever. And I was like, I'm sorry, that's not what I do. I mean, those are done. I'm writing new ones. If you don't like those, then that's fine. And fortunately, I never signed that contract. I had the paperwork there, and time went by, but something was telling me, don't do this. And it turned out I was right. So this other guy, Rafe, who was also coming into this club, he said, well, if you come to Nashville, I will get you a publishing deal. And I went, okay. So I drove to Nashville with a friend of mine, and he said, he made a list of the publishers, and he said Tree was where he was. Tree was the best publishing company that for me, and so he got me an appointment with this guy. I played him some songs, and the guy said, I want to sign you. And he said, I can't give you a draw. He said, but I will pay you $100 every time you turn in a song, and I will get you as much demo work in the studio downstairs playing guitar as possible. And I said, okay, but here's the thing. I'm going to go back to LA. I'm going to get my pregnant, soon-to-be wife. We're going to drive back here in my Volkswagen. And when I get here, are you still going to like these songs? And he said, I like these songs today. I will like these songs forever. And I said, okay, I'll be back in a few weeks. And so I did. I went back, and things just started popping immediately for me. I mean, it was a lot of cuts, and I had a single, within 6 months on the radio. I had a top 20 record, and but in answer to your question, but I started working with a friend of mine named Jamie O'Hara, and in Nashville, you run into it would be like living in Los Angeles and being an actor. You would run into actors everywhere. I mean, every waiter, car hop, whatever. Everybody's an actor. In Nashville, everybody's a songwriter, and so you run into them all the time. And you're out at night having cocktails quite late, and everybody's always saying, "Oh, let's get together and write a song." And sometimes you would, but mostly it would be like, just let's get together and write a song. That would be the end of it. And Jamie and I had been saying that to each other for a number of years. And then finally, there was a pivotal moment in both of our lives. And honestly, what it was he was a pretty bad alcoholic. And he had quit drinking. And he joined AA. And I was never much, I mean, I did and do drink, but not, he was a black belt. And, but I did other things, and I also stopped at exactly the same moment. Not the same day, but certainly the same moment. And we had both gotten, he was doing the same thing that I was doing, like writing a lot of songs that he didn't care about. But he was having success doing it, and we both got to the point where they would have like get-togethers at Tree sometimes at night, what they call them guitar pulls. And so there'd be a bunch of writers there and families and whatever, hanging around, and people would play a new song, pass the guitar, play a new song, pass the guitar. Whenever the guitar would come to me, I would just pass it along, because I didn't have any songs that I wanted to sing in front of these people. And he was exactly the same way, and we both kind of went, we're really tired of doing this. Let's write songs that we actually like. And we did.
Excuse me.
And that was the point where it's like, I don't really care anymore what happens to these. I figured if we do our work really well, something will, rise to the top in terms of someone else being interested in it, and so you can make a living. because I mean, ultimately that's what you have to do. And then we started doing that, and then we started the band called the O'Kanes and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, I mean, at that point, I gave up that route.
I mean, I was kind of like going down that line questioning because I do a lot of writing with people all over the country, Skype writing, and a lot of times what we're doing is we're looking at pitch sheets and looking at who's looking for music,
Right.
and then we're writing songs based on pitch sheets.
Right.
And I personally find it hard writing for other people, no matter how well you know their music, no matter how many songs you've heard by band X, Y, or Z, or performer X, Y, or Z.
Right.
It's really challenging to write a good song for somebody else, and I always find it easier to write a song that feels good for me,
Right.
and then say, okay, now this might work for someone else, but just to write a song with someone else in mind, I find that really hard. And I was just wondering if you had ever done a lot of work like that, and if so, if you shared the same experience.
You know, I think what your instinct is correct. To try and second guess what someone else is going to want is extremely difficult. And people, well, they always claim they're looking for something different. Whether they are or not, I'm not always sure. But
even the publishers do that. The publishers will say, well, I want you to write what you think the person will do next.
No.
You know, don't write what they do, write
Right.
you know, write where you think they're gonna go, and so you write something where you think they're gonna go, and they go, well, that's not what they do. It's like, well, no kidding.
Well, the only real, or my gauge of success is at the end of the day, I have a song that I really like. I have written one song, actually, that I wrote with somebody in mind. And they cut it, actually. But I've never, and that was like, and that was, at that time in Nashville, the heads of the publishing companies, by and large, were also record producers. And so the drill basically was they would find somebody who could sing, well, that would be up for debate, but that they thought that they could make a record with. And they would have a staff of writers, and those writers would turn in songs, you know, whatever it is, and the song pluggers that were on the floor, and where I was, there were probably 4, maybe 5 song pluggers that were actually actively out pitching songs every day. But a lot of the income that these publishers were making was because they would have an artist, somebody like T.G. Shepherd, or this is going back, one of these kinds of guys that were sort of entertainers, glorified lounge singers, really, is what they were. And so they would get their writers to come up with 10 songs. They would record the songs, so that the publishing company had all the writers there, and so he had all the publishing on all of these songs. So they put out a record, and that's where they would make their money. They would make their money from radio play, because at that time, I mean, if you sold 75,000 albums in the early 80s, that was a lot of records. I mean, I remember, you know, I had a cut on a guy that was actually turned out to be #1 record, on a guy named John Conley, and he sold a couple of 100,000 records, and that was astronomical. Unless, the rare exception was something really huge, but those guys were also putting out 2 albums a year. You know, so, you know, if Buddy Killen, who's the guy that owned Tree Publishing Company, had 3 or 4 artists, he's looking at least 20 songs a year for each one of those artists. That's a lot of songs. And there were a lot of companies that did that, and the record companies, I don't really know how they made money, but they did. But the volume is, that's the old joke, is how do you make money? Volume. But it's as I say, a penny business. But if you stack up enough pennies, it starts turning into dollars and more. And then there'd be the aberrations where someone would come along, with just something like Shania Twain or something, which is sort of unexplainable phenomenon, where they would just sell 5 million records, or that kind of. Somebody would have a crossover hit, and suddenly they're selling huge amounts of records. So I was swinging. What's his name? I can't remember his name now. The artist that had that. It was just a country record when he put it out, but suddenly it was a worldwide phenomenon. This thing, and and they would make a lot of money on that. But generally, the publishing business was about what they call mechanicals, which is airplay. And it's not about mechanicals. It's about airplay. The mechanicals are what you get for actual record sales. Now, and so there were a lot of artists, there were a lot of people putting out records all the time, and they would go through them pretty quickly too. I mean, so you may be successful as an artist for a few years, and then you're gone. You pretty much are out, playing nightclubs. And for the artists, the records, they never made any money on records. If they were lucky, they got a small advance, and it would be small. For them, making the records was simply a way for them to get gigs, and that's how the artists made money, was by back in the day, those guys would work quite literally 360 nights a year. I mean, they were gone all the time, from one club to another, night after night after night, and that's what their life was on a bus. That's how they lived, and then they would just fall out of favor. Suddenly someone else would come along, and they weren't interested in T.G. Shepherd Records anymore. They wanted somebody else, somebody younger, whatever. And so they would eat them up and spit them out pretty quickly. And that now has changed pretty dramatically, really. There's not as many artists, but they sell more records. But there's more artists that generate their own material as well. And so the cuts are fewer and farther between, and then you get into all other sort of economic issues of Spotify and Pandora and downloads, and that's a whole other world that I'd be happy to talk about.
Okay.
But anyway, back to your point,
Okay.
I think that's what you should be doing, is writing something that you like, because the truth of the matter is, and I don't mean this to sound cold, but the chances are pretty good that that's all it's ever going to be, is something that you have that you like. And that was always my attitude in making records, is like, when I made records, and still do, but I only recorded songs. I never had anybody pitch me a song, suggest a song. I recorded exactly what I wanted to do, exactly the way they wanted to do it, because I figured the chances of this being a success are slim to none, really. And so if I'm going to fail, whatever that means, or not go out into the marketplace, let me put it that way, I would rather that happen on my dime, rather than doing something that I don't think I should be doing, but this other person who seems to know what they're talking about. If anybody knew what a hit was, they would just be banging them out all day long. There would be no album cuts. You'd have 10 hits on an album, but nobody does, which also goes back to like the idea of writing a song for a particular artist. I don't know, write the best song you can. I mean, I can give you an example from myself. The biggest successful song, biggest money maker, blah, 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 that I've ever had was a song that I wrote that Alan Jackson recorded. And this was so far away from anything that Alan Jackson would ever have recorded. And yet he did. And it was really crazy. I had written this song, and I really liked it. And I never really pitch songs very much. Occasionally I will, but I'll pitch like one song and go, you know, I think you might like this. And that was always my basis. I never pitched a song specifically for an artist. If I could get in to see a producer, I would play him what I thought was the best song that I had at that particular moment, because he wouldn't, I knew the song was good enough that he couldn't dismiss it. He would have, the worst that could happen would be him saying, geez, I just don't think that's right for so-and-so, but I love that song. That kept the door open so that I could go back again, and I wasn't flooding him with going, well, how about this one? And how about this one? And how about this one? I would just play him one song, and that way, and I would call, because by now I knew a lot of people, because a lot of people that were running record companies were people that were playing on my demos when I first moved to town. And so it was not hard for me to get in to see people, but I didn't abuse it at all. And so that people knew that if I called them up, I would literally say, look, I need 10 minutes, that's it. We can come out, say, hey, how you doing? How's the kids? How's the wife? Blah, blah, blah. Listen to this, see you later. And I'm out of here. And with this song, that I really liked a lot, but it was way, way off the mark. And I knew the guy who ran Arista Records. He was a songwriter. Tim Dubois was his name. And I called him. I didn't even know who was recording. I called him up and I said, look, I've got a song I really would like to play for you. I just really like this thing. And so I went in, and this was on like a Wednesday. This is honest to God truth. This is like on a Wednesday, and I went in, I played him the song, and he said, oh, I got two people that are looking for songs that I'd like to play that song for. I said, okay, who? And he said he was looking for songs for Brooks and Dunn, and he wanted a song for Kix Brooks to sing. And I know Kix Brooks, and I've known him for a really long time, and he's a lot of things, but a singer he ain't. And I was like, oh, Kix Brooks, okay. And he said, and Alan Jackson. I went, I love Alan Jackson. That would be great. So this is a Wednesday. He said, can you get me 2 cassettes here tomorrow morning? And I went, sure. And so my publisher sent over 2 cassettes. And on Friday, I get a call from Alan Jackson. I've never met, well, actually I did meet him on the telephone one time when he had his first record out, but I didn't know him at all. I got a call from Alan Jackson on Friday wanting to know what the song was about. And I was like, oh my God, it couldn't be any clearer what this song is about. I really don't know how to explain this. And I went, it's a love song. It's a love song, that's all it is. And he recorded the song that next Monday. So this all took place between Wednesday and Monday, him recording this song. This almost never happens. It used to happen in the old days. I mean, I knew guys that could walk in the middle of a George Jones session and say, I got a new song, and they would stop the session, listen to the song, and cut that quickly. But you had to be Bobby Braddock or Curly Fudd or something like that to pull that off. And so this was like record-breaking speed. And so I thought, well, this is great. This is really great. And I know at the very least, he's going to sell millions of records. And so that's going to be some good income. It was a solo ride, no, it was a co-ride. I own half the publishing on it. So this is like a home run for me. And then ultimately, they did put it out as a single. And when they were getting ready to put it out as a single, and the record company did not want to put this record out. They really did not want to put this out. But Alan Jackson is the big gorilla in the room. And so he went in and said, no, you're putting this song out. This is what I want as the next single. And so they did. But I got a call from the head of marketing and radio promotion. This is honest to God's truth. It was another guy that I knew from when I was on Columbia, who had worked, he was an intern when I was on Columbia. Now he's the head of some department at Arista. And he calls me up and said, look, we're going to get a lot of calls on this song. And I'm like, no, you're not. But okay. And he said, now when we get calls from radio programmers and journalists, can we have them call you so that you can explain what this song is about? I'm like, this is honest to God truth. And I said, sure, have them call me. I never, of course, got a call from anybody. And they were afraid that the song was lurid and that people in Kansas or Minnesota or somewhere that wasn't a main metropolitan area were somehow going to be offended by this song. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And I was like, lurid? I mean, have you guys never heard of Conway Twitty? I mean, my God, you want to talk lurid? Boom, boom, boom. Hey, I know what that means. And so does everybody else. You know, I mean, every song that he ever recorded back in those days was about sex. I mean, they all were. And so this was, in my mind, pretty benign. But it worked out. And the song goes a little something like this, if you'd like to hear it. I don't really do it much. And the song, it took me a really long time to write it, but not many hours. It stretched over a long period of time. What happens with me is I tend to write the first bit very quickly. Whatever, it just kind of comes out, and you know, I can shake it up and put it together. But going back to that second verse business that I was talking about at the beginning, I never knew what the second verse was to this song. And so every time I would sit down by myself to work, I would start off playing this song, hoping that when I got to the second verse part, something would fall out. And it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't, and it went on for a long time. So that's what I mean, it was months and months to finish the song, but really only an hour or two when you add it up all the time, because I didn't belabor the second verse. It has to just, for me, on this thing, this has just got to just come out, and I don't know what it is. And it ended up being a very strange second verse. And anyway, it's called I'll Go On Loving You. And it's a spoken word. When I look into your soft brown eyes, and when I see your delicate body, revealed to me as you slip off your dress, I'm reminded that what I feel for you will remain strong and true long after the pleasures of the flesh. I'll go on loving you. I'll go on loving you. I'll go on loving you. And be it the wind or the rain or the moon up in the sky, the spin of the earth or the changing of the tides. I don't know what brought us together, what strange forces of nature conspired to construct the present from the past. it was so crazy to me because it's the whole point of it is that I'll go on loving you after all this. You know, it's not about flesh. It's not really about any of that. It's about like a real love. I didn't start out that way necessarily. I don't know what it was. I probably just was doing on the guitar, and that's all. And just doing that over and over and over again until, you know, I went, when I look at these soft brown eyes, went, oh, there's something, I could do that. I could keep that ball rolling for a while. But when it came to the yes,
I'm sorry. I'm a total opposite. I'm not what looks like your average country songwriter.
There's no such thing.
Well, okay, a lot of people are like country, but I write all genres.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for me, I can be sitting down watching TV and all of a sudden I'll hear words
Mm-hmm.
and I'll jump up and run for a pen and a pad and write it down.
Yeah.
And at the end, I'm like breathing hard because I heard the whole melody, the words, and everything. And I have a songwriting partner who we write together some songs as well. So we said, you know what? We're going to Nashville. And we went to Nashville, and we heard all the terms. I've listened to you song pluggers and demos and all of those things. And we went and sat down with a guy named Pete Bordenally. He had worked on some different albums and everything. He plays the guitar or whatever.
Yeah.
And he loved our songs. He was like, wow. And then it was, well, you're going to need a session singer and a full band and about $5,000 to get it done the right way. And we lived here. She lives in Atlanta. I live here, and they're in Nashville. So for a couple of years now, we've been trying to get to the point that we can go back to Nashville and get this thing done. But I'm here today because I said, wow, this is someone who's actually done it. What advice would you have for someone like me who I don't know, I'm not going to be in like the clubs and having to come across someone. What?
No, sorry.
No, so, you know, I have songs. I believe they're great songs. I believe that if they get in the right hands, that it could be a very promising thing. You know, we've started our own publishing, you know, things like that.
Right.
But as far as song pluggers, I'm listening to you, you're like, well, there were like 4 or 5 and this is what they did. And
Right.
how would someone like me get going here, you know? And as far as the $5,000 demo, is there another way or
Oh,
yeah. I mean they're like, it has to be you have to have the full band and you have to have this and you have to have the professional quality and you know, so
Well,
I just
I don't know, Pete, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
Robert Metzger sent us in his direction at the time. I don't know if you
I don't know
ever.
who that is, but
Okay.
Pete's name I know as a guitar player, but he's been around for a long time. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, he may be a legitimate guy. I don't really know.
Okay.
I can't say. I hesitate.
Well, he also said he could put the songs in different people's hands that he worked with. So that was something that kind of, you know, as far as we're concerned, we didn't know any difference. But, you know, I'm now, like, here I am years later, and I've got these songs that I still believe are great songs and still need to come up with that money. So I've been thinking, but you all have kind of made me think maybe there's another route just by the reaction I just got.
We can certainly get a demo done for less than $5,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And possibly not have to go to Nashville to do it?
Oh,
Yeah, okay. Okay. See, that's why I'm here today. I'll get everybody's phone
Well,
numbers.
I don't know. You have much better
Right,
luck
right.
to these folks than me because I don't know people here. But
Okay.
you know, it's. I don't exactly know how to do this. I mean, I can. Do you sing?
I can sing, but I'm more for the songwriting. But I said I'd even demo my own songs because, you know, I know the melody and know how the song would go.
And you know, I mean, songwriters are not historically great singers.
Okay.
You know? I mean, You don't have to be a great singer
Mhm.
to deliver a song.
Okay.
And I don't know how to do it that way anymore. I mean,
Okay.
the situation that I was in was really different in that I had done these demos myself with the band that I was working with. So all we had to do was hire a studio for
Mhm.
a few hours and an engineer. So you were talking about hundreds of dollars.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I mean, you can get a demo studio
Okay.
in Nashville for. I mean, the idea of $5,000. Are you talking about one song?
No, they said 3 or 4 songs on there.
Yeah, well, you'd be looking. I mean, if you honestly, if you had session musicians, you'd be looking at probably a couple $100 a piece for 4 people would be more than enough to do that. So you'd be looking at $800 for musicians for a 3-hour session.
Mhm.
I don't know what a studio would cost nowadays.
Mhm.
Let's say it's another 1,000, which would not be anywhere near.
Near, still near.
Well,
All
you
right.
could get demo studios in Nashville for nothing.
Okay. And then once you get that demo done, then
That's the question.
these song pluggers, how
You can't. I'll be honest with you.
Mhm.
You really can't. Um, the days, I don't know if there ever were days that you could walk into a publishing company and say, hey, I've got some songs, will someone listen to them?
Right.
Generally they would say no, or if they said yes, they still probably didn't do it.
Mhm.
They would go in the trash, really.
You need to know someone, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
you do.
Yeah.
And if that's the route that you want to go, someone is gonna have to swing open that door
Okay.
and say, "Come on in,"
Okay.
which is what happened to me.
Right.
That just happenstance.
Mhm.
I don't know what pieces came together
Right.
to make that happen.
Right.
On the other hand, I do. I mean, I kept going.
Kept
I
at
kept
it.
doing it and doing it and doing it. I did it in New York. I did it in Boston. I moved to Los Angeles, and I was 31 years old before anybody opened the door and said, "Come on in." And that's all I ever did. I've never had a job.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
When I was a kid, I had a paper route, but that was the extent of my actual working experience. Other
Okay.
than that, I've just played music and somehow been able to eke out the most modest living. Or as I said before, fortunate enough to have a girlfriend who had a job and enabled me to just do this day in and day out.
So right now, if you wrote a song and you said, "Hey, so I need to get this to this person,"
Me?
yeah, you personally, you have a route that you can
Not
go
to
through.
everybody, but I could probably. There are a number of people some people.
You can reach out to.
But
Yeah.
there are a number of people that I could call
Mhm.
and that would say, "Sure, bring a song back,"
Okay.
and they would listen to it.
Maybe you'll.
Absolutely, and if they liked it, they would pass it on,
Okay.
or if they were producing something, they would play it for their artist if they thought it worked.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean that I don't use it though. I don't do it anymore. I just don't. I kind of gave that up, pitching songs. I just don't do it anymore. And now the things that I write they're really not terribly radio friendly.
Mhm. Would you consider it as a song, like a song plugger type of role?
Would I?
Uh-huh.
No.
Okay. See, you never know unless you
No.
ask. So I just.
No, but see, I mean, this
I have to
it's
ask.
really a legitimate question. And
Okay.
the truth is that I hate to say it, but it's hard to get anybody to pay any attention in Nashville from Gaithersburg or wherever we are.
Right. Right.
And because there are people there that this is what they do day in and day out. I mean, you're talking, these people are pros.
Mhm.
This is what their job is, and they show up every day, and most of them have publishers
Mhm.
that are successful. But the thing that you can do in Nashville. And I've spilled this scenario out to people many, many times over the years. I mean, people would come that I might meet, or a friend would say, hey, I've got a friend coming, could you talk to them?
Mhm.
I would always say the same thing, I'll talk to them, but I won't listen to anybody's songs.
Mhm.
I can't do anything with them.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be in a position of going, that's not very good, or that's great. Or
Right.
maybe you should, I don't, it's not what I do.
Right.
But I'm perfectly happy to talk about it and you know, advise on the truth as it appears to me.
Right.
Now, and what I would tell these people that in Nashville, there are outlets, there are clubs that have open mic sessions. Now, there are probably clubs here that have open mic sessions, which is great. You can get up and sing songs, you can get some experience, but there's nobody sitting there in the audience that's going to hear that song and go, hey, that,
Right.
so and so should record that song.
Right.
That's not going to happen. But in Nashville, you know, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it work actually, where people would come to town and I go, okay, this is what you need to do. You're going to have to go to all these open mic sessions, throw yourself into this pit, basically. Stand in line to get an audition, to get up on stage, to sing a song. And what's going to happen is that you are going to meet a lot of people who are in exactly the same situation that you are. Some of whom are good, and others who aren't. And there's a natural weeding, thinning of the herd at some point, because people will just give up. And so that, you know, you'll find yourself sort of just inching along. This is all totally predicated on the fact that you are actually good. If you're not, then you're just going to spin your wheels forever. But what will happen is you will meet other people in the same circumstance that you are, and afterwards you'll go, hey, I love that song that you did, and they'll go, yeah, I'm really into that sort of thing. And you'll start talking to each other and go, hey, let's get together and write, you know, and you'll become friends with these people who are in exactly the same circumstance that you are. And then you'll do it again, and maybe you'll get up together or whatever. And through attrition, your writing will get better. Because once again, it goes back to working with people who are as good or better than you are, and you will keep rising up to that, whatever your natural level is. And if it's good, you have a chance of something breaking through, of meeting somebody, or somebody hearing a song.
Excuse me.
Going, hey, I really like that, you know. So there's no demos have been done here yet. You know, you're just talking about getting up on a stage and singing a song. That to me is really it. To do it, to be lobbing in songs into Nashville or anywhere else for that matter. Though Nashville gobbles up more songs than any in the world. There is nothing like it anywhere. The chances are just not good of it happening. I was in a situation years ago where I was asked to go to Ireland on a co-writing session, and so they had they wanted to do a Nashville meets writers meet Irish writers, and we all went to a hotel together outside of Galway. And the hotel was just basically full of songwriters from Ireland and Nashville. And not only Nashville, there were some guys from Motown